My name is Eleanor Price, and at 64, I thought I had learned how to sit quietly at the edges of family gatherings. That night, on Christmas Eve, I sat at the far end of my son's dining table, watching the twinkle of red and green lights reflect on the polished wine glasses. My son, Noah, was carving the turkey, trying too hard to please everyone, while his wife, Kara, moved around the table like she owned not only the house, but every breath in it. I had baked a pumpkin pie from scratch that morning, the way I always did, hoping it would bring a sense of tradition to a holiday that no longer felt like mine. The clatter of silverware softened as Kara lifted her glass. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that warms a room. It was the kind that slices through you, leaving something cold behind. She looked straight at me and said, almost playfully, "You should feel lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." For a moment, the only sound was the faint whistle of the furnace. My hand tightened around my napkin. I glanced at Noah, praying he would say something, anything. His eyes darted down to his plate, and he kept carving, each slice sharper than the last. My chest burned, not just with anger, but with the hollow ache of recognition. I realized I was invisible in a house I had once helped pay for, invisible in the family I had carried through grief after losing my husband. I didn't answer her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I simply lifted my fork, took a small bite, and forced my lips into a smile that felt like glass shattering inside me. But when I drove home later that night, snowflakes whispering across the windshield, I gripped the steering wheel with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The moment I stepped inside my quiet house, I hung up my coat, walked to the desk where my laptop waited, and opened my online banking account. My fingers didn't tremble as I clicked through each automatic transfer I had set up for Noah and Kara over the past 2 years. Mortgage help, car payments, grocery stipends, one by one. I canceled them all. As the final confirmation screen flashed, I whispered into the silence, "No more." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, catching dust motes that floated in the air like tiny reminders of how still my house had become. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold between my palms. The bitterness of Kara's words still clung to me, sour and heavy, but the stronger taste that lingered was resolve. I opened my ledger book, the one I had kept since Noah first left for college. Every check I had written, every transfer I had arranged, every emergency bailout, they were all listed in neat rows of ink. I traced the numbers with my finger, realizing how much of my late husband's savings had been funneled into that house across town. What stung most wasn't the money itself. It was how easily my generosity had been twisted into expectation, and then into mockery. When my phone buzzed, Noah's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I thought maybe he was calling to apologize, to acknowledge what had happened at the table. Instead, his voice was tight, almost rehearsed. "Mom, Kara says the bank messed up. None of the transfers went through this morning. Can you check?" I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. "There's no mistake, Noah. The transfers stopped because I stopped them. You and Kara are going to stand on your own 2 feet now." The silence on the line stretched. I could almost hear his confusion turning into panic. "Mom, you can't just—" "I can, and I did." I cut in, softer than I felt. "I love you, Noah. But last night made something very clear. I won't bankroll my own humiliation." I ended the call before he could answer, then pushed the phone aside. My hands trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of the line I had finally drawn. That afternoon, as snow thickened outside, I gathered receipts, letters, and old insurance statements from a box in the hall closet. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew this. The truth about Kara was buried somewhere in paper trails and whispered stories, and I was done pretending not to see it. By evening, the dining table in my small house was buried under stacks of papers, old bills, copies of checks, even Christmas cards with notes scrawled inside. I laid them out like puzzle pieces. The more I studied, the clearer the pattern became. Kara's handwriting showed up often, polite thank yous for the help, usually followed by another request within weeks. Each one had felt reasonable at the time, but together they painted a picture of a woman who had never intended to stand on her own. Still, I needed more than suspicion. The next morning, I drove to a small office downtown. Its sign faded but tidy. Midwest Investigations. Inside, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes introduced himself as Tom Callahan, a private investigator. I told him everything. Kara's sneer at the Christmas table, the years of financial dependence, the gnawing feeling that I had been funding something darker than simple laziness. Tom listened without interrupting, jotting notes in a worn leather pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. If there's a trail, Mrs. Price, I'll find it. But you need to prepare yourself. People like your daughter-in-law don't usually leave behind gratitude. They leave behind wreckage. A week later, Tom called me to his office. He slid a folder across the desk, his expression grim. Inside were printouts of public records, court documents, and newspaper clippings. Kara had been married before, to a man who died in what was ruled an accident on a hiking trip. The most unsettling detail wasn't the death itself, but the timing. His life insurance had been doubled just 2 months before the fall. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the pages. There were also notes about overdue child support linked to 2 teenage boys from another relationship, boys I had never met. Each document pulled Kara further from the role of a difficult daughter-in-law and closer to something far more sinister. Tom tapped the folder with his pen. This isn't just about money, Mrs. Price. This looks like a pattern. You should consider taking this to the authorities before someone else ends up on a headline. I drove home in silence, the folder heavy on the seat beside me. Snow whipped across the windshield, and for the first time I felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. Kara wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. 2 nights later, the phone rang just as I was settling into bed with the folder still on my nightstand. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me said to answer. A young voice cracked through the line, hesitant and unsure. Is this Mrs. Price? My name's Aiden. Kara's my mom. I sat up straighter, heart thumping. Yes, Aiden. How did you get my number? My brother found some old letters with your name on them. We didn't know you even existed. His words stumbled, but the pain behind them was sharp. We just wanted you to know she's not who she says she is. She left us years ago, said we were better off without her, but she always comes back when there's money. Always. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my throat dry. How old are you, sweetheart? 17. My brother's 15. We've been living with our aunt, but we keep hearing stories about the men she's been with, about how they... His voice broke off, then softer. I don't want her to hurt anyone else. After the call ended, I stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the hum of the furnace. The folder on my nightstand felt heavier than ever. 2 abandoned sons, a dead husband with a conveniently timed policy, a trail of debts and disappearances. The next morning, I drove straight to the federal building downtown and asked to speak with someone in the fraud division. That's how I met Agent Dana Whitaker. She listened carefully as I laid out everything: the bank transfers, Tom's folder, and now the phone call from Kara's son. Her expression hardened with every detail. "This isn't just family drama," she said finally. "This looks organized. If she's done this before, she may be part of a larger operation. We'll need you to cooperate, and it won't be easy. But if you're willing, we can build a case." As I walked out into the cold afternoon, I felt the weight of what I had set in motion. I had stepped beyond family boundaries and into something far bigger. The question that gnawed at me was simple. Had I just painted a target on my own back? Agent Whitaker wasted no time. Within days, she came to my house with a small black case, the kind you only see in crime shows. Inside was a discreet recording device, no bigger than a button. She slid it across my kitchen table and met my eyes. "We need her in her own words. Do you think you can get close enough?" My chest tightened, but I nodded. "If it helps put an end to this, I'll do it." That weekend, I invited Noah and Kara over for what I called a peace dinner. The snow had piled high along the walkway, and the air stung with bitter cold as they arrived. Kara stepped inside in a bright red coat, smiling sweetly as if Christmas had never happened, but her eyes flickered around the room, calculating. Dinner was awkward. I made roast chicken and set the table carefully, while the tiny microphone hidden under the mantel clock ticked silently in my mind. I asked gentle questions about Noah's work, about the boy's future, about her plans for the new year. For a while, she gave rehearsed answers, polite but thin. Then I leaned forward and asked casually, "Do you ever think about your first husband? It must have been hard losing him." Kara froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly. "Hard? Maybe at first? But life insurance is meant to ease the blow, isn't it? That's the whole point." The words dropped like stones in the room. Noah's face drained of color. I kept my own expression calm, though my pulse hammered in my ears. Later, as they were leaving, Kara brushed past me with a whisper sharp enough to cut. "Be careful, Eleanor. Curiosity has a way of shortening lives." When the door shut, I leaned against it, fighting the urge to collapse. Agent Whitaker had what she needed now, but Kara's warning echoed through the quiet house. For the first time, I felt the edges of real fear pressing in. The house was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that makes every creak sound like a warning. I had just finished rinsing my teacup when the motion light in the backyard flickered on. My pulse spiked. Through the thin curtains, I saw a shadow move across the snow, steady and deliberate. Before I could reach for the phone, the back door rattled. The old spare key Noah had once given Kara must still be in her possession, because the lock turned with ease. She stepped inside, her silhouette framed in the dim kitchen light, a wool cap pulled low over her head. "Well," she said softly, closing the door behind her, "looks like you've been busy digging. That's dangerous, Eleanor." My heart pounded, but I forced my voice to stay level. "Breaking into my home is dangerous, too." She tilted her head, almost amused. In her hand, she carried a small wrench, the kind you could swing hard enough to do real damage. "It's easy to stage an accident, you know? People slip on basement stairs all the time. A cracked skull, a tragic headline. Nothing more." Then I took a careful step back toward the mantel, where the camera Agent Whitaker's team had hidden was aimed directly at us. My voice didn't shake when I said, "Every word you've just spoken is being recorded, and not to a tape. Kara, to a federal server." Her smirk faltered. "You're bluffing!" Before I could answer, the front door burst open. Shouts filled the hallway. "FBI, drop it!" And a flood of agents stormed in, weapons drawn. Kara spun, panic flashing across her face, and for a split second she raised the wrench like she might fight, but two officers pinned her to the floor before she had the chance. I stood frozen by the table, my breath shallow, watching as they cuffed her hands and read her rights. For a moment, relief washed over me. It was over. But as they dragged her past me, Kara turned her head and hissed through clenched teeth, "You haven't won. Not yet." For weeks after the arrest, I let myself breathe again. I cleaned the house, visited Noah, even baked without that gnawing sense of dread. I thought maybe Christmas had ended the nightmare after all. But then the phone rang one gray afternoon, and Agent Whitaker's voice carried no comfort. "There's been a ruling," she said carefully. "The defense challenged the evidence. Because of how the recording device was placed, the judge ruled it was outside proper warrant parameters. The confession is inadmissible. Kara's being released on bail." I gripped the counter so tightly, my knuckles whitened. "You're telling me she's walking free?" "Temporarily," Whitaker answered. "But Eleanor, you need to be cautious. When people like her feel cornered, they don't get smaller, they get more dangerous." That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside felt like footsteps in the snow. I double-checked the locks, drew the curtains, and sat awake in the dark, clutching a mug of cold tea. By morning, exhaustion dragged me down, but fear kept me upright. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Kara's voice slithered through the line, calm but sharp. "You think you're clever, cutting me off, turning Noah against me, but you underestimated me. I know where you live. I know where you shop. And if you don't back off, you'll see just how short pity runs." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me staring at my reflection in the black screen. My hands shook as I set the phone down. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. I drove to Noah's house, desperate to warn him. But when he opened the door, the look on his face told me everything. He'd already heard from Kara. She had told him I was exaggerating, that the FBI had made mistakes, that I was trying to tear his family apart, standing in his doorway, snow melting off my boots. I realized Kara wasn't done. She was back in the game, and this time she was angrier than ever. The snow had begun to melt into gray slush by the time Agent Whitaker knocked on my door again. She stepped inside, shaking the cold from her coat, her expression set with quiet determination. "We can't rely on past evidence," she said. "We need something airtight. She's reaching out to people. Eleanor, stirring her old contacts. If she makes another move, we have to be ready." I folded my arms tightly. She already called me, threatened me. "What more proof do you need?" Whitaker's gaze softened. "Threats are smoke. We need fire. We're going to set a trap." The plan was simple in theory, terrifying in practice. I would agree to meet Kara alone, somewhere public, somewhere she would feel emboldened but still think she had control. The FBI would surround the area, unseen but close. If Kara so much as hinted at her crimes, the evidence would be clean, admissible, and strong enough to end this nightmare. 2 nights later, I parked at Riverside Park, the gazebo lit faintly by the glow of nearby street lamps. My breath curled into the frosty air as I sat on the bench, forcing myself to appear nervous, vulnerable, just as they had coached me. A small microphone was tucked beneath my scarf, linked directly to the agents waiting in unmarked vans at the park's edge. The crunch of footsteps on snow made my heart seize. Kara appeared from the shadows, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. She wore no smile this time, only a sharp intensity in her eyes. "You really should have left things alone," she said, her voice carrying easily in the night air. "But now you've brought me out here, and I'm not walking away empty-handed." I clasped my hands in my lap, willing my voice to stay calm. "What exactly do you want from me, Kara?" She leaned closer, her breath warm against the chill. Silence. And if I can't have that, then I'll make sure you're the one buried instead." The words hung in the frozen air, sharp as the knife she didn't even need to draw. I sat perfectly still on the bench, but my pulse pounded so loudly I was sure the microphone hidden beneath my scarf was picking it up. Kara's two companions shifted restlessly behind her, their eyes scanning the empty park as if they half expected the shadows to come alive. "You can't threaten me into silence," I said quietly, forcing strength into each syllable. "Everything you've just admitted is already recorded. The federal agents you think you've outsmarted, they're listening right now." For a split second, Kara's composure cracked. Her jaw tightened, her eyes darting to the trees. Then fury replaced hesitation. She lunged closer, hissing, "You think they can save you? They won't get here fast enough." That was the signal. From the darkness beyond the gazebo, lights burst on. Red and blue strobes cut through the night as voices thundered. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The two men with Kara scrambled, one reaching inside his coat. A flood of agents surged forward, weapons drawn, movements precise and rehearsed. I pressed back against the bench as chaos erupted. Kara shouted for them to run, but within seconds both men were tackled to the ground, their arms pinned. Kara herself was forced to her knees, her wrists cuffed behind her as she spat curses into the cold air. Agent Whitaker appeared at my side, steadying me as my legs finally gave way. "We've got it all," she said firmly. Her threats, her accomplices, her intent. It's over this time. Eleanor. I wanted to believe her, watching Kara struggle against the cuffs, her once polished smile replaced with raw rage. I felt both vindication and an emptiness I couldn't name. I hadn't wanted this war, but I had finished it. As the agents led Kara away, she twisted her head back one last time, her voice hoarse but venomous. "You'll regret crossing me." I exhaled slowly, frost clouding the night, and whispered to myself, "No, Kara, not anymore." The trial moved faster than I expected. With the recording from the gazebo and the testimony of her two abandoned sons, the prosecution built a case that left no cracks for Kara's lawyers to slip through. I sat in the courtroom as the verdict was read, the oak benches creaking beneath the weight of silence. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed like church bells in my chest. Kara didn't look at me as the bailiff led her away. She kept her chin high, but her eyes were empty. For the first time in years, I felt my shoulders loosen. The fear that had followed me from kitchen to bedroom, from phone call to midnight silence, finally began to lift. Justice had been served, not only for me, but for the others who had been caught in her snare. Noah stood beside me outside the courthouse, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He looked older than his 35 years, worn from shame and regret. "I should have defended you that night," he said quietly. "I let her voice be louder than yours." I touched his arm, my throat thick with unshed tears. "You see it now? Noah, that's what matters." Months later, the house was filled with light again, not from Christmas decorations, but from laughter. Noah had found peace with Grace, the young teacher whose kindness softened the edges of his guilt. When they announced they were expecting a baby, my heart swelled in a way I thought I'd lost forever. Life was beginning again, fragile and full of hope. On Sunday afternoons, I sometimes drove to the community center where I had started volunteering. There, I spoke to groups of older adults about setting financial boundaries, about recognizing manipulation before it took root. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a warning and a promise that dignity has no expiration date. Standing on my porch one evening, the sky washed pink with sunset. I thought of my husband and the strength he had always seen in me. I whispered into the cool air, "I did it. love. I finally stood my ground. And for the first time in a long while, I felt whole. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.